So, how do language and dialect affect literacy? I feel like this is something that is really important to talk about, especially because classrooms are super diverse. And a lot of times we aren't going to have students that that come from the same language and understand the dialect that we use, especially in academics. And something that's really tough about this is that it really affects the assessments that they take because they don't necessarily understand what is being asked of them, and so it affects um their assessment, and it doesn't accurately depict what they necessarily know. Um, One thing that I found from a research journal from Sage Journalism, or excuse me, Sage Journals, is it's called Factors Affecting Language and Literacy. And this was in context of um, an Australian student, and it's by Gwendolyn L. Webb and Corey J. Williams. And in this, students from diverse language and backgrounds, we learned they just face a lot of challenges due to their different dialects that they may use at home versus at school. And so a lot of times this can really manifest itself in reading because they don't necessarily have the skills and tools to decode words. And so as a teacher, it's our job to really help work with students in order to help them gain those skills to be able to decode words and work with them and just help them, give them the tools that they need, as well as work with the parents, because a lot of times, even though where they may be using a different dialect or language at home, a lot of times it's super vital for teacher and parents to coincide because they'll be able to set up the best plan for the student so that they can be the most successful at school as well as practice those things at home. Something that I've noticed in general is teacher attitude when it comes to being able to accept more diversity in, different languages and different dialects. A lot of times when something's different, we tend to feel like we should push it away, where as teachers that embrace this difference, it can really help students feel like they're a part of a community. Basically, negative perceptions of diverse dialects can really hinder learning because students might not want to share out, or they might not want to ask for a teacher's help. So the more positive they are and the more open they are to just helping students in general and being able to be accepting of who they are and what they come from, is amazing because they'll be able to learn through such a safe classroom environment. And it's really important to just not discriminate against these students that have a different language or dialect, but just being able to give them those tools and just helping them succeed. I think it's so important to be able to prioritize nurturing students and helping them understand their self-worth, especially among those that just come from diverse linguistic backgrounds. Um, a lot of times, I mentioned this earlier, we're going to see challenges in some standardized testing just because it is a variation in language or the structure or even the grammar, pronunciation. There's just a lot of different things that are going to really impact that. And so being able to know the ways as a teacher to get that student the best help that they need to understand the questions that we can best assess where they're at is super important. I also think it's very important to give students the tools as they're working on things, and being able to check in with these students is so vital as they're learning, because a lot of times they might feel like they're behind, or maybe they were understanding, but now they're not. So sometimes a tool could even be simplifying complex English words or aspects, and reducing that challenging words and language to help them comprehend. This could be like just just a lot of scaffolding in that area. So it's really important to keep in mind that these students might have a harder time, but it's really important that we have a positive aspects of teachers, that students are going to come from different backgrounds, and it's our job to help support them where they're at. And even if that means just helping get them the right support and tools, because language dialect is really going to affect how a student understands and decodes words. so their comprehension may not be where we think it should be. But it is very vital that we try and look for that as educators. And I've noticed in my fourth grade class, my ninth grade class isn't as diverse, especially because there wasn't as many kids for that first part of the trimester. But my fourth graders, there was a lot of diversity. This semester, I had an early field practicum, and I noticed a student who was really proficient in Spanish, but not necessarily in English. And I was able to, I noticed another student, and he was fluent in both English and Spanish. And so being able to talk to my mentor teacher and ask her if they could work with each other for some parts of my lessons that I would teach, and she was all for it. And because I don't know Spanish, I know a few things, but not enough to really help. But I was able to use another student to help really foster this student's understanding and help them know that they have a buddy and they have someone that does understand them, and that we still do care for him. We still like love them in the classroom, but even though it might take a little bit more time for them to comprehend and understand where they're at, because a lot of times it's not fair to give an assessment to a student that doesn't even necessarily understand what the question is asking. So giving them those little tools really goes a long way. Okay, what are the best practices, strategies, slash activities in assessment for ELA? Something that I think is really important with different assessments is that they shouldn't all be the same. I think what's really important though is that teachers are constantly seeing where students are at. And so what's more important is giving more formative rather than summative assessments, because through formative assessments, teachers can assess how students are doing even just after a lesson. Something that I've been doing with my ninth graders is they have a self-reflection portion on a worksheet that I typically give them, or a self of reflection little exit ticket. And usually I incorporate a few questions. One, just them reiterating what they had learned that day through the lesson, which taps into a level of Bloom's taxonomy, which is that remember and understand aspect. So I want them to first have that basic knowledge and understanding, and I want them to reflect that. So I see that at least they understood the basic part of the lesson. And then usually I have them identify something in the lesson that they were able to achieve that also complemented um, what we were doing in the lesson, that shows me that they understood it from their participation in the lesson. And then I have them reflect on the work that they did. Um, for example, I recently had students learn about emotion in journalism, and they had a project where they had to use sounds, images, or words to depict an emotion to me. Um, and then I had students self-reflect on why they better understand how journalism and sounds, emotion, and words can affect someone based on their specific project. And some of the answers that I got were really great because they really understood why incorporating something so simple as sound and even videos together can really have an impact in journalism and how people really view their work, which was pretty incredible. Some other strategies that I think are really important in assessment for ELAs, for students to really understand what they're doing, they need that clear rubric and that clear outline, because without it, they don't necessarily understand the success criteria, which is what's needed for them to understand the why and the importance outside of the classroom. So that means really having explicit rubrics, meaning that they're not using ambiguous language. A lot of times that's easy to say that a student does something well in a rubric, or that they meet this goal, but I've noticed in a my literacy or not my practicum, but my literacy class, is that my teacher, she will say student was able to perform XYZ 3 out of 4 times, and she'll put that in the proficient category. So being able to even be specific with numbers is incredibly helpful for students because they know the purpose of where they're going and why they are basically doing what they are doing, which is super important as they learn the things that they are. Okay, so how do you utilize questioning and discussion in your classroom? I have noticed this a lot with my ninth graders is a lot of times as teachers, we want to take over discussions and we play these games that we don't necessarily intend to, which is guess what's on the teacher's mind. And as sometimes that is necessary, but not necessarily helpful, I want to say, because students, in order to have a really good discussion and to reach those higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, which include synthesizing, creating, evaluating, and analyzing, they need to be able to communicate with their peers and teach and learn from each other. So what's really important, first of all, is that the teacher needs to be able to have questions that lead to higher order thinking. Um, for example, if I'm asking a question that has a specific answer, there's no room for discussion in that way. However, if I'm able to come up with a question where students are able to really take a minute to think about it and it doesn't have a direct answer, there's so much more that they can gain from that. And I think that's super, super cool because students should be able to take a second and really be thinking and analyzing and evaluating the different aspects of the question in context of what they're learning to be able to find the answer. And it shouldn't be something where they're just able to repeat it back because they're not necessarily learning from that. They're just regurgitating information. So an example of this is in one of my lessons that I was able to teach, I was talking about the why, and I'm going back to the emotion in journalism. And students were really able to, when I talked about the why, I didn't say, I said very much why why do we care about emotion in journalism? And I think that is a question that like about what I asked. And what was so interesting is how many students wanted to participate when I asked that question, because it started off pretty basic with the answers. With well, I want someone to feel how I feel. And then we dug a little deeper of, okay, well, why? And I started getting students, which was so interesting, at their table groups asking each other why. And it took a little bit of time and it took a few questions like that to get them asking each other, but they eventually got there. And so what's so important is that students are building off of each other's answers. And in some YouTube videos that I was able to watch, they were from the YouTube channel of Engaging and Why. And it was examples of these teachers being able to really have students lead these discussions and how cool it was to really see that. I've also noticed it from my mentor teacher. He has really been able to have students being able to facilitate their discussions while also stepping back and watching what they come up with. A lot of times as teachers, we really want to be in there. We want to make sure that they're learning what we think they need to learn. But sometimes the best learning comes from when they're able to teach each other and put in their own spin and their own take on it. So that is something that's super important, is that as teachers, we're coming up with these more open-ended, higher order thinking questions that lead to these really in-depth classroom discussions that are student-led. How do we engage reluctant students? How do we support struggling readers and writers? So this question really resonates with me, especially because early on in my schooling, I did not care about school very often. And I noticed what teachers would do to help me engage when I was not interested. However, because of that, now I realize the things that I can do with my students that honestly have really worked. So I actually learned this from um, our class this year from MLL Support Strategies that Brother Chandler made. And it's just this website that has different support strategies for students that may not necessarily want to engage in what they're doing. And through reading his ideas and instructional methods, I've also found my own strategies, and maybe not my own, but also observed different strategies that have worked. Something that I think is really interesting, especially with ninth graders, is they all kind of know what they like and what they want to do for the most part. And they are very passionate about the things that they like. So what I've noticed is being able to have effective student engagement that involves what students are interested in. This is going to help reluctant students get excited about what they're learning. And what I've really noticed is from my mentor teacher, Mr. Beecraft, is he really lets these students, they're so creative, and he lets them have a lot of freedom with what they choose to base their projects off of. And because it's a journalism class, he can do that a little bit more, where students are communicating these really important, super cool things with not only their peers, but their school and their community. And so being able to help students understand that they get to implement what they're interested in and what they like, and that other people are going to care about that is super wonderful, because students, they really do start caring when they just have a little bit of interest in it. And so giving students that freedom, as well as maybe if you can't necessarily give them a lot of freedom with project-based learning, because there are sometimes certain content areas that we need to adhere to in those state standards that we need to really focus on, that doesn't always allow for that creative freedom. But sometimes it can be implementing an activity where maybe a really reluctant student is struggling, but we know that they love basketball. So maybe for a review on vocabulary, they play a basketball type activity where they're still learning, but they also have that fun aspect of being able to shoot a hoop, right? With after getting the correct answer or something. And then supporting struggling readers and writers goes a little bit deeper, because we as teachers need to be providing those accommodations for students that need that extra support. It's really important for them to have those tools for success. A lot of times that can mean maybe they have a structure for a writing assignment, whereas other students, they already know how to do that. But maybe for a struggling student who is struggling with reading and writing, especially for writing in this aspect, maybe they have an outline that for their topic sentence has a few words already filled in, and then they can fill in the rest. Or it's just giving them those little tools that's going to keep building and building until they can eventually work on it independently. So something that I learned is that success varies across different levels. So for our instruction as teachers, it's really important that we notice where our students are at. For example, tier one for instruction means that I can help students just by a basic normal instruction. Those successful students will get it and they're fine. Tier two is for those students that need a little bit more help. So maybe they understood what I was saying during my instruction, but they might need a little reminder or an extra helping hand as they go throughout the assignment. And the third one is tier three, are those students that are consistently having challenges. And those are the students that should be getting those. Honestly, all these students should have these tools and scaffolding techniques to be able to help themselves, while also for those tier three students who are consistently having challenges, is getting them that extra help, even if that means maybe getting an extra support person. So those are ways that we can engage reluctant students, and also how we can support struggling readers and writers is by evaluating our own instruction and seeing where students need the most help. Okay, so what would your instruction look like if our school moves to an online instruction at some point this year? Something that I've really been able to learn as I have had to go through online instruction as a student in high school is that fostering relationships with students is so important. And I also learned from some YouTube videos that we were assigned to watch is that teachers who really do their best to implement being able to have those student relationships. For example, I've seen teachers start off class with an icebreaker, or they'll reach out to students about something that they learned about them through a one-on-one conversation conference. Being able to really tie in SEL with online instruction is so important. Another really big thing for me in online instruction is explicit instruction, being able to give examples and using videos, because using videos not only helps give students that connection with the teacher, but it really also helps them have a better understanding of what they're supposed to be doing, especially when the teacher's modeling. For example, in one of the YouTube videos, there was a nutrition teacher who showed her students how to make an omelet, or maybe it was a culinary teacher, but in that aspect, she was able to connect with her students as she was cooking, as well as teach them and give them explicit instruction as she went through each of the steps. So as we really learn to foster our relationship with students on online instruction, they're going to want to try and want to thrive in those ways. And I think it's just really important as we create online instruction that we are making sure that we are giving explicit instruction and giving examples. And I know that as we do that, students will be able to be successful and feel that they are still connected, even though they're not physically in the classroom. So as online instruction, especially with technology, becomes more prevalent, it's so important for teachers to understand the tools that they can use to not only teach, but also to connect with those students. So, yes.